Welcome, I'm your host, Malcolm Gallagher. From our BizVision studios in the UK, you're watching the BVTV network. Now, whilst I work across a number of sectors, I've been in travel, tourism, leisure and hospitality for 50 years, and I'm only 40. That means I've experienced many challenges from the sector, from economic woes, shortages, floods, to tsunami, unrest, you name it, I've worked in it. But the crisis facing the whole sector as a result of COVID is almost unprecedented, and its effect will impact for many years. However, it's time, as we say here at BizVision, to revive and thrive. But there's no going back to what was then normal in hospitality. We've moved on 10 years in 10 months. The majority of customers and guests won't be clamoring to expose themselves to risk, so safety will be the new norm. New laws such as the so-called Natasha's law around prepackaged food will also grow in their impact. New technology will drive new customer understanding. New social media platforms will influence tastes and trends. One of the key growth areas is certainly vegan food. Now, celebrity chefs like Tom Kerridge are getting involved with vegan eateries, but vegan food hasn't necessarily had a great write-up in taste and variety. Can it come through and be your food of choice for that long-awaited special occasion? I need an expert help here, don't I? Louise Palmer Masterton is founder of multiple award-winning restaurants, Stem and Glory, known for vegan food, gourmet vegan food. So grab a cup of green tea and let's go meet her. Welcome, Louise.
Hi, Malcolm.
It's lovely to chatting to you, and you're down in posh Cambridge and I'm up here in socially distanced Northumberland, but we've got a little bit of a joint passion. I do like what you're doing. It is so exciting, isn't it?
Well, thank you very much. I mean, obviously, yeah, we've seen huge growth, not just in the last year in vegan food, but in the last few years. And I guess, fortunately for us, we started Stem and Glory at what appears to be exactly the right moment. I mean, obviously, hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? But yeah, we've certainly seen extremely good growth, albeit the last 12 months, obviously, has been slightly choppy waters for everyone in hospitality.
Yeah. Hey, listen, just a quick little side question, if I can. Why Stem and Glory? Where does that come from?
Frequently asked question number one. Well, honestly, I'll try and shorten the answer slightly. When we were looking for a name, we were pretty stuck on the idea of something and something. And my husband and a friend of mine who does some design work for us, we were sending around a list of words that we liked, basically. And I looked down the list and there was the word STEM and underneath it was the word glory. And that was it. It stuck. And everyone loved it. So that was it. There was no, people kind of read things into things, don't they? But there isn't any depth to it at all.
Right. Well, it beats the one putting a blindfold and sticking a pin into something, doesn't it? Louise, I'm delighted you're kindly guesting on our enterprising BVTV channels. In this BVTV show, viewers and listeners, I'll be talking to Louise in 3 parts. First, I'll ask her here, what's the situation of vegan thinking, and especially vegan food today? What's happened during lockdown? And we'll also not talk just about food, but also vegan fashion. In part 2, we'll move to talking about what's caused the change. And in part 3, I'm asking Louise to get out her crystal ball and tell us where she thinks the vegan trend is going and how we can avoid that fast food, poor quality route. Louise, before we get into our 3-part talk there, can you briefly introduce yourself to my viewers and listeners? Who is Louise Palmer Masterton? Where does your passion lie? Oh, and what's your favorite of all your vegan dishes?
Okay, so, well, I'm not young vegan. I've been vegan for a very long time. I actually gave up eating meat when I was a teenager, and it was literally a friend of mine who was vegetarian at the time introduced me to the idea of compassionate eating. And it was one of those things that just hit me like a ton of bricks, really. And I'd never thought about it before. But once I thought about it, I couldn't continue to eat meat. It was literally like that. So it was an aha moment that changed the course of my life forever, really. And yeah, I was a teenager at the time. And obviously since then there's been, it was very much a fledgling kind of industry at that time. So I've seen it evolve, through, I mean, it's always been there in this country, but it was very much kind of on the hippie sort of fringe movement back in those days. And there certainly wasn't any kind of culinary work going on within vegan cuisine. I think there was in the States. There was a few notable chefs in those days doing some very interesting thing with raw foods. And certainly when I was a young vegan, I had books on macrobiotics. I did do a raw food diet in my early 20s for quite some time. So there's always been there, but it was very, very small and fringe at that time. So yeah, it's been a wonderful, wonderful thing to watch, the massive explosion, and definitely gone mainstream now. And also, as well as the kind of explosion in veganism, there's the whole kind of plant-based movement, which you may think is the same, but I've actually just written an article about there are some notable differences. Essentially, they are the same. Their consumption of only plant-based foods, but they're coming really from a slightly different place. My favorite dish, well, you're probably not surprised to hear that I'm a keen cook. So that has also kind of underpinned this evolution through all these years. I've also done quite a lot of traveling through the Middle East and Asia. And I'll probably say that Middle Eastern and Asian, particularly Asian food's my favorite type of cuisine. And I just love authentic Thai food, and I love authentic Middle Eastern food. And you'll see little bits of those coming through in our menus from time to time.
Yeah. And the key word there is authentic, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think if you're a foodie or if you're keen on cooking, I love Indian food, actually, I has to say as well. I mean, one of my obsessions is a kind of perfect, authentic dal, because I think what you get in often Indian restaurants, by the way, I like that too. But, if you meet people who've got a culinary tradition of Indian food, the way they approach dal, it's just completely on a different level, really. So I love exploring, really authentic cuisines, whatever continent they come from, really.
My favorite Indian food is the Goa, further south, which is away from the heavy stuff in the north there. Okay, let's talk about part one. And I want you to talk about the situation of vegan thinking, especially vegan food today. But we've got some hot news to discuss as well, haven't we? I want you to tell us what's happened during lockdown. And I hear that 25% of evening meals are now either vegan or vegetarian. And obviously, there's a massive change. And I know that you've responded to change because today's news is real hot, isn't it? Tell us about it.
Well, obviously, like any other hospitality business, we were closed last March, and that came as a bit of a shock. But, shocks can lead to creativity sometimes, and that's kind of exactly what happened with us. So we set about kind of redefining our offering and working out other channels. So moving towards an omni-channel approach. I mean, not abandoning the hospitality model completely, because as everybody knows, I think it is coming back. And part of that was, how do we kind of pivot our offering to make it slightly more delivery friendly? We were fortunate enough that we got a grant from the local authority here, Cambridge and Peterborough. And from that, we've created a new pizza range, which is vegan, obviously. Stem and Glory is very much on a healthy tip. We're on the healthy end of the spectrum. So kind of, I guess the challenge was, how can we veganize pizza and make it healthier at the same time? So that's what we've come to. So we've got things like spicy kimchi pizza.
Well, that is the hot news, isn't it?
Yeah, vegan pizza with kimchi on, which you may think is a kind of oxymoron, but anyway, it is absolutely delicious. We've got, and actually at the moment because we're obviously still closed at the moment in terms of public dining, but in January we launched an at-home range. So we've actually been shipping. So our normal menu is entirely gluten-free. It's kind of it's tasty, healthy vegan food. So it's not junk. We don't use meat substitutes. And then we've got recipe kits as well. We also have an artisan pasta range, and now we have the vegan pizza. So at the moment we're shipping all over the UK, and it's you cook it at home. It's going to heat up, so the pizza goes in the oven at home. We actually send out like micro herbs and garnishes and drizzles, which you put on it after you've cooked the pizza as well. So it's kind of adding another dimension to it. A super healthy twist.
Do you think that type of business then could almost overtake your traditional restaurant?
That's the $6 million question at the moment. And, as many restaurants have pivoted to an at-home model during this time, and it's been a good experience and many learns. And I actually, if I'm completely honest, I love the online platform, and I can see all kinds of things that will do quite well on an ongoing basis. But whether or not this is because, I mean, at the moment, obviously, we're using our restaurant space to dispatch from. So obviously, there's a big question now when the restaurant opens. So what do we do with that? So I think I read this morning, actually, in the Propel newsletter, that something like 65% of operators say they will continue with their at-home range, but nobody really knows what it's going to be like on the other side of this. I mean, I can tell you that 60%, more than 60% of our customers for the online store don't live in Cambridge or London, which is where we have our restaurants. So that would appear to indicate that people will, but whether they'll be frequenting restaurants in their own hometowns, that's what remains to be seen. My gut feeling, I suppose, is that we will see a decline in the number of things we're shipping out, but I don't think it will go away altogether. And I think then we'll have an opportunity to kind of grow that, perhaps on a more gradual basis in the coming year.
Yeah, I think as people experience that they can have a better, as good a meal at home as, I don't say as good as going out with the atmosphere of a restaurant, but, you know, restaurant quality at home, then perhaps, you know, given that money may be tight for a while, that may be the way of doing the treat.
Yeah, you're right. And, you know, obviously we and all other operators who did similar things have become much better at it as we've gone on doing it. I mean, you know, you're constantly developing new techniques to make the food arrive in a good order, for example. So the way you package, separating things out. But, you know, I think another trend, and I think this is I'm kind of interested in as well, is the restaurant as the experience in terms of maybe a slightly more retail friendly space, because there is the opportunity to retail other things to your customers when they come through your doors as well. I think the restaurant will evolve in many kinds of different ways coming up.
I mean, Carluccio's did that quite effectively, didn't they? And
yeah, they're an interesting model as well. They have, you know, they do very well, I know, at Christmas with their hampers, for example, having been given one of their hampers on many occasions. And I think there is an opportunity for other brands like us to do similar things. And I think it is quite, I mean, like, for example, we've got Mother's Day here in England. I mean, we're shipping a huge amount of boxes out this week because we did a Mother's Day special menu. And I think those occasion things do very well. And I think, I think there's definitely an interesting space to continue operating in the online.
Yeah, and especially as online allows you to create a community, or raving fans, as they call it, don't they, in marketing terms? Yeah, and they themselves will start to give you feedback and input, will they?
They do. Oh yeah, they do, definitely. I mean, we've done multiple crowdfunding rounds, so we've got we've got 1,200 strong investor community, and you know, a very large percentage of them are our customers as well. So no, the whole thing just evolves. It's a very nice synergy between the customers, between the online, between the restaurants. I'm super excited actually to see how it all develops.
Yeah, well done. Yeah, let's move to part two. But before we do that, I'd like to remind viewers and listeners of your website, which is, and you can see it, viewers, on the screen behind me. And no, I haven't made a mistake. It is stemandglory.uk. So it's no UK, no CO. It's .uk. Let me read that out for listeners. STEM, it's all the W's, obviously. STEM, STEM, and you spell the and out, A-N-D, glory.uk. Remember, stemandglory.uk. And Louise, is that where people can also go to do the ordering?
Yeah, it's all under the same website. Yeah, there's a little section for the restaurants and another one for the store.
And today's news of the vegan pizzas, they'll be live up there as well, will they?
Pizzas, yeah, you can buy the pizzas. They're already out online. Oh, definitely.
I can see, you know, delivered in time for weekend kimchi, just in front of the rugby on Saturday afternoon. That's an ideal time to have it, isn't it? Yeah. Louise, it's time for part two. Let's talk trending and change. What caused this big upsurge in demand for vegan food? Is it concern for health? The conscious agenda, you call it compassionate, we call it conscious agenda with the planet. Animal welfare concerns, better cooking of vegan foods by chefs, celebrity chefs' interests. What's the main driver, and what will ensure it's a sustainable trend and not just a fad?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, isn't it, how things have evolved? Because when I did it, people pretty much only did it for ethical reasons, for the animals. the health benefits weren't really spoken about, and neither were the environmental benefits. That's something that came quite a lot later.
Yeah.
It's interesting, this was all very much, the Vegan Society was launched in the 40s, but it wasn't really until the 80s that it became properly defined, and the term plant-based also came about in the 80s as well. And that was when the health agenda was firmly out there, and the whole kind of plant-based thing came around studies that were done with the whole food plant-based diets and effects on cancer. And the term whole food is, of course, very significant there, because obviously, as we all know, you can be vegan and very unhealthy. Let's not forget potato crisps are vegan. So whole food plant-based, that's when the whole health thing came in. And then, of course, as we came into the last 10 to 20 years, the environmental messages became so compelling. I mean, you'd be hard pushed to find anybody that hasn't got a view on that now. So, yeah, I think it's just something that's evolved. I mean, I think are the reasons I remain vegan, I guess it's probably, well, it was always for the animals. I was never going to waver from that. But I think the reasons people have adopted it is definitely health and environment. And probably the environment is the one that's having the mass take-up effect now.
Yeah, I just want to throw in a personal thought here, though, because I presented leadership for chefs programs, worked with Prue Leith on a number of initiatives. And at the time, chefs kept telling us that vegan food was hard to cook, and the mark of a good chef was to be able to cook vegan food. And it seems to have got a little bit easier, and they've learned how to do it. Is that one of the drivers, do you think?
Well, yeah, I think so. I mean, it still is the case that a lot of chefs don't get it, but it's that we come from a meat and two veg population, don't we? Yeah. That's a kind of idea that a meal is not complete unless there's a slab of meat on the plate. And if you think about it, meat, and in particular dairy, if you look at the French tradition of cuisine, it's like, you throw butter and cream at everything, and of course it tastes delicious, So you take those things out, you've got to be very skilled with dimensions of flavor. And I think it's down to umami, which I'm sure is a term you've heard of, and umami is created depth flavor in different stages of cooking. So it's like you cook things a variety of different ways in one dish. For example, you don't just make a soup from chucking vegetables in, you maybe roast the vegetables first, and that adds that depth of flavor. It's things like when you toast seeds, they develop a kick of umami, and then there's a long list of umami foods. And if you don't use that kind of food, you're not going to create that level of flavor that you get from meat and dairy. And I think a big factor is willingness to experiment as well, because there is vegans have been under attack, and I think there's been an unwillingness to make the effort, but that has now started to shift. Whether it shifts and accelerates, that remains to be seen, because that the majority of restaurants still primarily serve meat as their primary offering, rather than, there's been a little bit of a shift now. You will see plant-based menus where you can opt into meat and fish, and I think that's an interesting development. So you actually, as a customer, have to actually make the decision to opt in, rather than, this is the menu, and then you just switch off that part of your brain that says, no, it would be really better if you ate plant-based food right now. So yeah, I think, hopefully we've got better standards of chefing, and hopefully at STEM and Glory we're making a contribution to that. We're constantly experimenting with new techniques, finding new ways to make food delicious.
Our sort of colleges, the schools, cookery schools in colleges, starting to put it into their agenda, because that was another big problem we felt when I was working with the British Food Trust, for example. The colleges just weren't interested in changing the curriculum.
I just don't think you've got a history of the cuisine yet. You will have in the future, I guess. So I think it's quite difficult. A lot of chef training comes from this traditional French cuisine. I just don't think you have the equivalent. You've got some quite interesting people out there. You've got Matthew Kenny, who's an American chef, who's kind of been doing the plant-based thing. And I think over time you will get these role models within the vegan movement, but it's not really there. So I think it's hard to define, isn't it? Whereas you've got this kind of parameters with traditional cuisine where you tick those boxes and you've trained someone as a chef, where it's a little bit more difficult. You've got some interesting people doing stuff in the movement, definitely. But I think it will just take time.
Yeah, yeah. Although, as we found out recently with the pandemic, time,
Yeah.
goes fast, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. I think consumer demand is what will, shift the barometer in this direction.
Yeah.
Because at the moment, most people will go to a restaurant and order the meat, the fish, the dairy, and then you'll have a lot of restaurants still only have a vegetarian option. They don't have a vegan option. So yeah, if more customers ask for it, more restaurants will put it on. But you've also got this question with regards to people like myself, for example. I don't particularly like going to non-vegan restaurants, but that's because I'm doing it for sort of ethical reasons.
Yeah.
I hope we see an explosion of vegan restaurants, but sadly, even within I know we've seen a demise of quite a lot of restaurants in the last 12 months, but what has been particularly hard hit have been small independents, and nearly all vegan restaurants fall into that category. So yeah, sadly, we've lost probably more than we've gained or will gain in the next year.
Although I do believe that investors are looking very much at the compassionate agenda. Just before we move on to part 3, I just want your advice. Let's say I'm going to a vegan restaurant for the first time. And I remember this many, many years ago in the early 70s, going for my first ever Indian meal in Wimbledon, I think it was. I hadn't the foggiest. I'd come from Carlisle, where, you didn't, foreign restaurants, Chinese and Indian, didn't exist, and then I was going for my first meal. I hadn't the foggiest idea what to buy. To order. Fortunately, I was with a lady who helped me into it. To try the vegetarian rice and that sort of thing. What would you suggest to somebody like me going into a vegan restaurant, a gourmet vegan restaurant like Stem and Glory? How should I ease my way in?
Just get stuck in.
Yeah, I know that, but I don't know what to order. Tell me.
Oh, right. Well, our menu is all vegan, so you don't need to worry about that. Whatever you order. Okay. For example, we have got things which will. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I'm completely on the experimental gourmet health end of the spectrum. But I've been in the movement for a long time, and we have dishes that tick that box because there are people like me, but there are actually more people like you that come into our restaurant. And so, for example, we have a bourguignon and celeriac mash, which is actually on our online store as our bestseller as well. So that's kind of probably a familiar dish to you. You've probably heard of it. It's absolutely delicious. Then we've got a Swede gnocchi, which is a house-made Swede gnocchi. But it's a take on gnocchi, and it's got a very creamy, rich sauce. So you'll find things that are quite familiar to you on our menu, as well as maybe you might come with someone who's a little bit more on my end of the spectrum, who would select the sort of food that I would order. So it's interesting that our more comfort-based familiar dishes are our best sellers. So there are definitely more people like you looking to eat in a vegan restaurant these days.
Excellent.
We target people just like you. You're our ideal customer.
Yes, yeah. Without a doubt. Thanks, Louise. Now for part 3. I'm asking you to get out your crystal ball and tell us where you think the vegan trend is going and how it can avoid the fast food, poor quality route that happens when people jump on a bandwagon. Are food producers and their investors making the right investments to deliver quality? And just remind us what part you think hospitality providers need to play into all as they plan recovery.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, isn't it? I mean, I think, there's loads of things I could talk about here, but very interestingly, you've got this meat substitute thing going on at the moment, which has been going on for obviously quite a while. I mean, actually, since the Linda McCartney sausage back in the old days of my veganism. Yeah. But, it's exploded now. But you see, these products are fake meat products. They're made out of soy, gluten, and pea protein is another really popular one. But if you look at the nutritional components within those, they're not really comparable to meat or fish. And there's a big explosion, by the way, in plant-based fish products at the moment, which may also think is an oxymoron. But so I read it only this morning, actually. So the interesting development, the interesting work is with microalgae. Now, microalgae is you're going to be able to, they're making flour from microalgae, which has a more similar nutritional analysis breakdown to fish, for example. So then when you start to get products which are as good for you, they've got high nutrition. The microalgae, for example, has a broader spectrum of amino acids, which you may know about within terms of fake meat products. They don't really have that. You have to combine foods. Now, as a person who, I don't really eat fake meat products, and we certainly don't use them at Stem and Glory. But when you start to be able to get more nutritionally superior foods, then I think it starts to get quite interesting. And I think that is where you're going to see the growth, and that is where you're going to see the investment. I think we've done the fake meat products now, and it'll be interesting to see how many of those survive sort of forward into the future. But you see, the other thing with microalgae, because there's been stuff with soy, for example, it's not very environmentally sound. Gluten, wheat, it's not particularly healthy. Algae grows very quickly, doesn't require pesticides. It's a very, very interesting product, totally natural, because that's another trend I think is moving away from fake meats. I mean, for example, another of our pizzas is got celeriac ham. So it's ham. It's not ham, obviously, but it's made from celeriac, but it's got the flavors of ham. So it's quite healthy. It's a natural product. Vegan food for me is all about using beautiful vegetables and natural products, not replicating with fake products. And in answer to your thing, and again, that's the whole kind of fast food sort of junk thing, which is huge in the vegan movement. Every day you're seeing a new vegan burger joint, fried foods. It just seems to be in hospitality generally. And I don't know, it's because it's an easier business to run. People like it, even though they know they shouldn't. But it is massive. And I do hope that we see, by the way, apparently a fake meat burger is actually healthier than a meat burger. They have done quite a bit of research around that. So it's not as healthy as the food that we would serve, but it's not as bad. So it's kind of on the spectrum. So I just hope that the spectrum just shifts away from junk more into more healthy. And I think it will. And I think in terms of investment, I'm seeing, this thing I picked up this morning was from an investor perspective. That's where all eyes are moving now.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. But as you quite rightly say, the fake meat is almost like starting to vape to get away from cigarettes as an interim point, isn't it?
No, I think so. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And do you think that hospitality providers are starting to understand? I've got a lot of hotels that we work with across the UK and the world as well there, who are really trying to understand now this new customer demand and to meet customer demand. Because if they don't, they ain't going to get the guests, are they?
Yeah, no, it'd be interesting to see how it goes. I mean, you've got some big things, tie-ups now with like the Beyond Meat Impossible Foods with McDonald's and people like that. And I wonder, maybe you'll get people like us providing food for, I don't know, like hotels or menus. I have been asked about that actually already because people and hospitals think about it. I mean, in the news the other day that there's a hospital in Lebanon which is now only serving plant-based foods, and I think this is kind of a major step. But yeah, I mean, and again, there's lots of research out there to show that, instead of giving people meat and especially dairy in recovery period in a hospital, they want to be eating really nutritionally superior foods. So whether more people or hospitality businesses will get more involved there, that remains to be seen. But that would be great. It would be a good direction, definitely.
Yeah, I've interviewed quite a few CEOs who are making sure that their canteens, their business canteens and everything, are now providing authentic vegan food, particularly a large IT company recently in Dublin. And, because the CEO is becoming very conscious as well.
Yeah, well, if you think about it, it's a default position. Plant-based is the one to go for, because then you're covering all bases and everyone can eat it. Yeah, and it's funny, I did some work as the David Attenborough building in Cambridge, and they were the people, their catering default is plant-based. And if you want to do a catering event, then you have to actually opt into meat or fish. So yeah, more businesses will be doing that, I think. Yeah.
Now, just before I finish, Louise, I just want to remind people of your URL, your website, which viewers, obviously, you've written it down, haven't you, on the screen behind me. But for listeners, again, to remind you that it is all the W's, STEM, 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 and you spell and, STEM and glory.uk. There's no .co.uk, it's .uk. We certainly live in an altered world. Soon we will certainly play, eat and drink again in that altered world. But customers, especially in hospitality, will demand a new experience, as Louise Palmer Masterton has so expertly explained to us. Thanks, Louise, for a great interview.
Thanks very much for inviting me, Malcolm. It's been a pleasure.